All right, boys and girls, we are live, brand new Take Aim podcast, big deer and big stories. That's what we do here, and excited to have Greg Glesinger back from Drury Outdoors. And, you know, it seems like we just had Greg on the show. It wasn't too long ago, but, man, Greg is just keeping it going, man. He just killed the biggest Wisconsin bow buck of his life in Wisconsin, a giant 167-inch buck that is just gorgeous, but awesome stories. Late season bow hunt, I mean, you can't beat that. And just, you know, key in, you know, Greg really keys in on some of the factors that made this hunt successful, like food. And we get in some awesome habitat improvement, some management plans, all that good stuff. And Greg lays it out. And awesome show. As always, deer season never ends. We'll see you guys again next week. Hope you guys enjoy the show. All right, boys and girls, we are live, brand new Take Aim podcast, and as always, I'm Braden Hammonds, excited to be back, and excited to have my buddy with me, Greg Glesinger from Drury Outdoors. What's happening, Greg?
I tell you what, man, it's been a fun fall. It's been a year of a lot of ups and downs, but we're just wrapping up our season. I just tagged out just a couple nights ago, and now we're full blow going into basically land management. We've already started that this week, and we're going to really get after it next week. So I think you said it best, Brendan. You know, deer season never ends, and it doesn't for us either.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And, man, I'm super excited to talk to you because the late season, for a lot of people, it's really hard to hunt on certain types of property. So I really want to kind of dive in with you, Greg, and how you hunted this deer. You know, by the way, congrats, because I think is it your biggest Wisconsin buck ever, or biggest bow buck?
It is, yeah, biggest bow buck. I've shot and I've hunted Wisconsin now for I got to do the math, but it's plus or minus 25 years, and I've never had the opportunity to harvest an animal of this caliber. So this was a big moment for myself and Casey. It was a fun hunt. It all came together perfectly, but there's a lot of prep work and a lot of energy and a lot of time that put us in that position to execute, you know, a couple nights ago. So, and I'm sure we'll want to talk some about that. But, yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate the support.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and to me, the late season kind of, like you just alluded to, you know, it always seems to move really fast. And the next thing you know, you're into kind of, you know, management season and working on the next. And, you know, being that you basically shot this deer in 2021, you know, how was your mentality going into kind of closing out the year and deciding what buck, you know, was this buck one of your guys that you were targeting, or was this a newbie? Or give me a little rundown on that and how you're trying to balance your management goals basically already into the new year.
Sure. Well, we'll backtrack, you know, a few years ago. The farm that I hunt is predominantly tillable in Wisconsin. And so we have, call it, 20, 25 acres of cover, and we predominantly have ag around us. And it's very difficult to hunt. And for a long time, we tried to hunt this early and mid-season, and it just wouldn't work. And so the last 4 or 5 years, we've completely changed our strategy and just accepted that the farm is not a good hunting farm until late season. And when we changed that mindset based on intel and observations and trying to hunt it, we changed our strategy and changed our land management tactic towards that. So we really did a lot of timber stand improvements in the small pockets that we had control of, and focused on late season food. And, you know, late season food, in my opinion, the best is corn or beans. And if I had to say what one is best between those two, I would tell you beans is by far, in my opinion, better than corn. And so we started just making sure we would leave more than adequate food in certain locations next to these cover thickets that we had created. And we would not hunt these farms at all. I'm talking not even go into them until the reconnaissance cameras told us that we needed to. And we have an average to below average deer herd where we're at. We have some decent numbers, but we don't have a lot of mature bucks because of the pressure of where we're at. There's a lot of people that are very passionate about this sport, and they shoot a lot of stuff that's not of age, and it's tough to get to get deer to age. So we play towards that strategy and stay out of it and leave tons of food. And over time, not only this year but last year, we had the same experience. We had last year was the same thing. We had a deer that moved in from I don't know where, and the same thing happened this year, which is we had a deer moved in that I have no idea where he came from, and he moved in about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and we were getting them periodically. And once his pattern started becoming more regular based on our Reconyx trail camera intel, is when we wanted to go in and strike. And his currency of showing up to the plot ramped up as the cold fronts and the snow started accumulating. And it's shown to us that our farms, when I say late season, really don't get going until that Christmas time, once the snow drops and food becomes sparse and it's hard to find it, and we have a lot of grain left for that idea in mind. And once they find it, they typically are going to stay close. And he was showing up once every 3 or 4 days. We'd miss him, and then he'd be gone for 5 or 6. And then we went and pulled cameras on this past Monday, and he showed up the night before. He was on the plot, and then so that would have been Sunday, which would have been the 17th, and Casey pulled the camera the afternoon of the 18th, and he was on there at 7 o'clock the morning of the 18th. And I was like, okay. I said, now's the time. He's been there twice. It's the first time he's done it. He's got to be bedding close. And sure enough, even though DeerCast said okay, our most recent information told us that we needed to go. And we were lucky enough to have the wind we needed, which was a northwest wind, and went in there, and sure enough, he showed up. And we executed, it was a 35, 36-yard shot, and, the rest is DOD history. So to tell you that the homework we've been doing it for years and trying to narrow the scope, and we finally got these farms figured out on access points, what time of the season we should hunt them. And this was our very first time in on this farm, our very first sit the entire year. And it goes to tell you that if you do your homework and you're patient, I know it's a hard thing to do, is not go hunt them, but if you observe more, hunt less, you'll definitely kill more. And we've been doing that mantra for the last 5 or 6 years now, and our kill ratio has skyrocketed. I think we killed, this year we killed a 167 on the first sit. We killed a 233 on our first sit, which purely becomes back to homework and staying out and keeping pressure at a minimal rate as possible.
So pressure's huge, and I know we've talked about that quite a bit on the previous podcast, Greg, but with this deer, give me a little rundown a little bit about like your guys' access and how much food did you guys actually have, and when you did this management-wise, was this food basically set aside for the late season? Did you kind of already know this about this farm, that you were going to target it later in the year?
Yeah, correct. We had given up. We've hunted that farm early and mid-season for many years with no luck. And finally we just said, you know what, this is it's not the best access because of the crop fields getting in and out with the food. We could usually get in, but coming out, we always blew stuff out. And so it just made my skin crawl. So I said, we really can't hunt this farm until the crops are gone or harvested. And I said, we just need to strategize of where we want to put this and leave the grain and the best location for access, and then the best location next to cover that we obviously improved through TSI and laying some trees down and so on and so forth, and letting some kind of swampy ground grow up in some grass and warm season grass sections that obviously provide cover as well. And so we put it between those two sections and let the grain sit there, and I think it's probably 4 to 5 acres of grain, and just let it be. And literally, once all this stuff was harvested around us, is when things started to change, because the food becomes obviously not all that
abundant.
Abundant. I lost train of thought there. And then it goes to another level when the snow hits. We were having some good activity before the snow, but once the snow landed, we got, probably call it 6 to 8 inches of snow on the ground right now. That changes things at a different level. So the last 2 years, we've killed really nice mature bucks. One was last year was January 29th, and this year was January 18th. So it showed us that once that snow hits the ground, our farms get better. And we only, we're lucky enough that Wisconsin extended the season last year for the first time in the area that we hunt through the end of January. So we started focusing our strategies and our food plot strategies once the DNR allowed the extra season to go through the end of January. I'm like, okay, now we've got the whole month. Let's plan accordingly, and let's not even hunt this farm until January comes and the Reconyx cameras tell us we should. In the last 2 years, we've done that, and we shot a 154 last year and a 167, basically almost a 168 this year. So the new approach and new strategy is paying off.
Yeah, for sure. It's so wild that you hear it so much, Greg, and sometimes I don't know if people buy into it enough, but when it comes to late season, it's crazy how much, food is a part of their lives in that late season. I mean, it's everything. So food is king when it comes to late season. But are you surprised sometimes, to almost relearn it every time you do one of these hunts like that? It worked out that way for you. But, I mean, I know you already know this, but just for our listeners to talk about them, how important that is to have that food available during the late season.
Yeah, we were just talking about this food come late season, deer are slaves to their stomach, as no different than we are, right? If you want to pattern anybody, just hang out their kitchen. You're going to get them at the bottleneck in the hallway at some point, right?
Right.
We all have to eat. So the game is about having grain this time of year. And once the cold drops and the snow hits, it is the number one, by far, hands down, the most important thing. And then the second thing is pressure, which is once those deer find that food, they're going to be there and stay close to it, and they're going to go from food to bed, and they're not going to travel much because they don't want to burn the calories. They don't want to burn the energy, so they're not going to move much. So you got to keep that in mind when you go in and out of these sections of your farm where you're leaving the grain, that you have to be very delicate on your exit and entry, because they're all going to be predominantly very close to that food. And we actually had Derek drive us in a truck to the base of the blind because I was so concerned of where they were bedded. I knew they weren't going to be bedded all that far away. And he drove us right to the blind, and we literally walked out of the truck, and we were 2 feet from the blind. And he drove out. And the reason why we did that is when we were checking the Reconyx trail cameras, we would use the same truck in and out every 5 or 6 days to pull cards. And so they were used to seeing that thing come in, come out, come in, come out. And we said, we got the pattern down. Let's just keep the pattern going, because our access is not the best. But there's ways around it, if you can think about it and help a buddy. Or it was Derek. We had my wife teed up. We had Casey's fiance teed up, and everybody was on board to help us. And Derek had the free schedule, so he jumped in the truck and took us. So the food is number one. Deer are slaves to their stomach this time of the year. They have to eat, and it's hard to find food this time of the year. So if you're the guy who's got it, and I'm not saying clover fields, I'm saying corn or beans, you will have deer show up that you didn't have 6 weeks, 2 months ago during the normal season. It will happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And it's kind of surprising, I think every year when I hear some of these stories, Greg, that, just like you, like kind of where did this deer come from? It's so unique to be like, he found it somehow, but he found that food. And once he found that food, he decided to kind of make a home there near that food based on what you're talking about as well, and that's that lack of that pressure. He felt safe enough to be like, you know what, I can get near this food and kind of survive this part of the winter because there is no pressure here. And that was a great point by you guys to use that vehicle access like that because, a lot of deer, come accustomed, especially on working farms, to those, types of vehicles. So that was an awesome job.
Yeah, it's one of those things that plus it was an extremely long walk for us to get there, and we didn't want to get all sweated up. And so we actually drove the tractor in there to create a trail so we wouldn't get stuck. So there's a lot of preparation, a lot of thinking to go through this to make sure you hopefully line your successes up. But, I could stress the food, a factor of 10 and tell you it should be a factor of 20 because without it, you just don't have a chance. And the farm changes the later it goes into this late season with the food if you have enough. And that's the key word. Having, an acre or two, you might as well not even do it because you're going to have deer show up, and obviously it's going to be predominantly does, and they'll eat it down, and then the time you get something mature, he might only be in there for a handful of days and move on. So if you're going to do it, make sure you leave enough that you can get through the year or through the season close for sure. And I know it's expensive and all those things, but it will definitely, as Casey and I were talking about, I said this is quickly becoming one of my favorite times of the year to hunt because they are so predictable. Once they find that food, they are so regular. It's just, people say the first week of November is one of their favorite times of the year, or the last week of October. I don't disagree with that. I mean, that's a fun time because they're on their feet and they're moving a lot.
Fun. Yeah.
But if you want to harvest a mature buck that you can pattern, it is by far the easiest year to do it, part of the year to do it, if you have the proper food. Because once they find it, they're there very often. It might be 2 or 3 days or whatever, but they're in the area and they're going to come back. You just got to play it right. And I don't think you can do that any other time of the year. I don't think you can.
I don't think you can either. Yeah. I think that's a big season within the season when it comes to deer hunting. It gives you that chance, maybe just in the beginning of the year if your stage opens in September and you have some green.
Yes.
But besides that, it's a small window in September and then back to what you're doing right now in January.
Very well said, Brad. I couldn't agree more with that. You get, if you have that first 5 to 7 days in September, 10 days, whatever, when you have particular bean fields or clover fields, I see more success over beans where you can pattern those deer that are going to and from those bean fields before they turn brown. That's how we killed our 233 this year, was exactly that story. We killed them October 1st, and we were hunting the bean fields that were just about turning brown, and we had the only section that was in that, it was more of a tan green. It wasn't quite there yet. It was in that transition period. And that's how we harvested him. And, you give it another day, 2, 3 days when that changes, and those beans change, their patterns change. So you're exactly right. This time of the year with food, late season, it's the same identical opportunity as it is that first handful of days of opening, if you're around a bean field.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the difference is January lasts longer. You have a better chance, I would say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Greg? You get a little more time to get those deer to be predictable. And with that said, I know you said, Greg, you had got a picture of that deer and you said that you needed a north wind. Was that based on his movement or what you needed to get in the blind?
To get in the blind and based how we set up the blind and the access, and then where we did all the TSI work, which is we put everything, come late season, the predominantly wind is always north or northwest. There's always the predominant winds this time of the year. So we set up our farms for those winds. Now, we've got a wind coming on Saturday that's going to be southeast. Well, southeast winds, typically this time of the year, they do happen, but they're not the predominant wind. So we set up all of our farms that we gear towards late season. Those setups that we have, the heavy grain fields left, are all set for north or northwest winds because those are the predominant winds. So once we pulled those cards, we're lucky enough to have a northwest wind that afternoon. I'm like, this is perfect. He was there last night. He was there this morning. He's obviously here. Whether he shows up or not, I don't know, but it's the best intel we've had for the past month. Up until then, he was there once every 2 or 3 days or 5 days. We would catch him. There was no pattern. And, the other factor is, at any moment in time, these deers can start shedding. Antlers can start falling off. So the first time I thought was the best opportunity to go after him was after we had 2 pictures back to back. I'm like, all right, here's the time because I want to get him before he sheds. And, if I know about him, I'm sure the neighbors do. So it's one of those things of take the most recent information, and if you've got the right wind, then I would go. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. What I like about what you said there, Greg, is you got the MRI and you got the right wind. You kind of leveled it at those 2 things. Sometimes during that late season, because of all the other stuff going on, you can't wait for maybe a high pressure, or you can't wait for all one of those 3 to 5 key features to line up well. Like you kind of went in there and said, I got the right wind. We know he's somewhere in the area. It's time to go.
Yeah. I mean, our pressure was 29.9, which is not the best pressure. And DeerCast said it was okay. And we did not have all the stars aligned for all the bullet points we typically chase. But the most important thing is we had the food. Yes, it was like 29, 27 degrees. It wasn't the coldest of days, but he was there too, the afternoon and the morning. So I'm like, we've never got him on camera that often. So I always put more weight into the most recent information than any other bullet point. Obviously, you got to have the wind. Don't get me wrong. We wouldn't have went in there if we didn't have the wind. But the fact we had the wind and he was there, I put a ton of value and a ton of weight in our decision process based on MRI information, and either we've seen him from afar or were conic stroke picks that we, obviously go get. And that's our number one go-to is the most recent information. And here's another prime example of it.
Yeah, that's a great tip for everybody for sure. I think sometimes people sleep on that because, they, like we just talked about or alluded to a little bit, is you want all your ducks in a row to line up. We want a big cold drop. We want, the wind to switch from the north to south or vice versa, and sometimes you got to take what it gives you. And that deer was giving you the information that, hey, I'm here. But with that said, Greg, tell me a little bit about that blind location and that bedding and your food plot. It sounds like obviously that kind of all had to be tucked really close together, but give me a little bit of information on that bedding, because it sounds like you've done some work there to kind of improve it or maybe expand that bedding a little bit. So give me a little bit of rundown of just kind of how you mapped out that food plot blind and that bedding.
Sure. So we had a small timber line that's fairly narrow, call it, 60 to 80 yards wide maybe, and probably, I'm going to say 200 yards long maybe, and then that transitions into a swampy, grassy section, and which holds a lot of deer. And so we don't have a lot of cover, so we left the food on the southern side of the finger, obviously because we're hunting a northwest wind. And then we left the first, probably 50, 60 yards of the timber line like it is. We didn't do anything with it. But once we got past that 60-yard line, all the way for the next, called 150 to 200 yards, whatever that line is, we did a serious timber stand improvement 2 years ago and 3 years ago. And so we didn't want the deer bedding, obviously, right by us for, obviously, exit and entry and getting in and out of the blind. So we plan it so everything is due north of us, and we give them every reason to stay north of us, and then we suck them in front of the blind to bring them south from our bedding area that we prepared to the north. So that whole preparation obviously lined up well and came together. They actually came from the west, from another pocket of timber that we worked on, and then came through the grassy section and timberline. So I think it's one of those things that I think you've got to think a year ahead all the time, and doing the preparation to your land the year prior will set you up for that year's success. And if you don't take the time to do the land improvements, you can leave the food, but if you don't give them reasons to stay or let them feel comfortable with the right bedding, you're going to get them, but I don't know how long they're going to stick around, because sooner or later the pressure's going to come or they're just uncomfortable. So, like Casey and I, we have a pretty good coyote problem, and that was another issue. I said, once we get this guy patterned, I want to go in there ASAP, because he may be there 5 or 6 days in a row, and a coyote may walk right through that timber stand improvement section and push them all out, and he may run them away for 2 or 3 days. There's so many variables that we're fighting all the time that once that information tells you he's there and you've got the wind, if your schedule allows it, I would go as soon as possible, because you never know when the variables are going to change. It could be wind change. It could be, who knows what. A coyote comes through there. You just never know. Heck, a neighbor's dog could get lost and walk through there. I mean, I've had that happen to me before. So you just never know.
No, you don't. No, not at all. But one thing I want to touch on real quick, Greg, is you had a great answer there, and we talked about this a little bit before the podcast. Actually, is talking about properties, and we both kind of agree on the fact that there isn't one right answer to this property here or that one. And what you said there is so great, because you can't just say bring the food and they will come. Well, yeah, they might come, but they're not staying. So if you have food, what's it do besides benefit your neighbors if your deer is leaving to bed somewhere else? It's benefiting your neighbor. So just a great tip on what Greg said there is take every little bit you can and improve it. One of the reasons why this hunt was successful is Greg had the food and then had a local bedding right there where he could stay. So, just wanted to touch on that, because it just, we cover so much information. It kind of stuff can go right in one ear and out the other. But if you didn't have that part, Greg, chances were you didn't have this outcome, I should say.
Yeah, it's hard to argue that comment. I think he would have been there for a period of time, but I don't think he would have called a new home his home for this time of the year. He could have very well passed through. As these deer, age and get mature, their mindset's different, and pressure becomes very sensitive to them, and they don't put up with it. And if you think you've got the food and you don't have the bedding, yeah, you may get a picture or 2 or 3 of them, but he ain't going to stick around long if he doesn't feel comfortable. And you got to have that bedding area, but you also got to stay out of there and not have pressure, because once he feels he moves into a new area, prime example, deer don't like to move. Once they find an area and they feel comfortable with it, the only reason why they're going to move is because of pressure or lack of food. You're telling them they have to go somewhere else, and then you're going to push them to somebody else's farm. Then they're going to go to somebody else's farm, and then they're going to figure out, well, do I feel comfortable here? Do I have food? Do I have what I need? If they don't, then they're going to go to the next farm, and they're going to keep moving until they feel comfortable. And we are our worst enemy most of the time, and it's that pressure, food, and cover. And if you can stay out of there and not pressure them and give them the food and give them the bedding, once they show up, if it's a deer that you don't know, when he comes in and you do all those things that we're talking about, he will feel comfortable. Once he feels comfortable, then he's going to create a pattern. When he creates the pattern, then you need to go in there and strike. And more often than not, I'm not saying you're going to harvest them, but you're going to have a great hunt. You're going to have a great experience.
Yeah, for sure. Much better one, no doubt.
Yeah, so, yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So going forward, Greg, what are some of your plans? Are you going to do some of the same things on this? It's that time of year where we kind of do a lot of that management work. So are you doing some of that same stuff this year on that farm?
Well, actually, we actually are going to kick into harvesting some does starting tomorrow. Now that our buck tags are full, we're actually going to start going in, and it's going to be very difficult because we got to do it with a bow, but it is what it is. But we've got some does. We've got too many animals on our farm. So we're going to go, Casey and I are going to go to 2 different sets with our Matthews and hopefully take 6 to 8 to 10. I don't know what that means, but we're going to take a few out here in the next handful of days because we need to thin out the herd. So that's our number one task for the next week to 10 days. And then we're shifting right into land management. It starts right now. As you said best, there is no off season. So we're going to start working on timber stand improvements and all the notes that we made all season long from observing the deer activity is start working on that. So it's a never-ending process. Our favorite time of the year is now through, call it May 1st, is when we get all of our stuff done that really sets us up for that fall success. And it is so it's such a domino effect that when we do we really get after the land improvement list in that 4 or 5 month period, our success always seems to pay off in those parts of the farm the following year, if not the year after. It's just been mind-blowing to me of how the deer seem to move around based on the work that we're doing. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, we talked a lot offline about this, and I think in the future, Greg, me and you will get back together here and talk about some of the work you've done doe harvest wise, and how all that part of the management game plays effect on your properties, and even just to dive in more, Greg's lucky enough to have a couple properties in a couple different states to manage, and Greg, like we talked about, you'll be the first to say each one operates different, and trying to learn a game plan for each one of those is really unique because, they're so different, and you constantly kind of have to check the temperatures on each one of those farms in those states to figure out what is needed and then make those adjustments.
You're absolutely right. I mean, every farm does hunt differently, and they all have their pros and cons, and you try to, learn what those pros and cons are purely by observation. And when Casey and I sit together, there's that app in your phone called Notes, and there isn't a time that we're not sitting together that we may not harvest something that afternoon or that morning, but I will tell you we are harvesting information. And we go through and we talk about what we're seeing, what is the deer traffic, where they're going, how they're exiting, what's changed, because Mother Nature is always changing the landscape. And so you have to stay on top of it to change with it. Just because you have a bottleneck this year, last year, the year before, doesn't mean it's going to be there for the next 5 years. Trees change, grass change, trails get changed by deer just moving differently. So, we'll got one prime example that one of our best bottlenecks was not a bottleneck this fall. And it's because deer created another path because some trees got so mature, they weren't as thick. They got taller and they got underneath them. So now we got to go in and do some some laying down of some trees and some bushes and doing some cutting to create it so thick that it's going to push them back into that bottleneck. So it's constantly changing, but the farms will tell you what they need. You just need to sit there and observe with an open mind and make the notes, because there's just too much of it. And then Casey and I just had our meeting 2 weeks ago where we compile all of our notes from our phones and we put them in an Excel spreadsheet, and then we rack and stack the tasks at hand based on time commitment, financial commitment, and what's most important based on the return on investment of the deer herd. What's going to be our best projects to give us the best results. And we have, pages of stuff we want to do, and we're not going to get to all of them, but we got to rack and stack the priority and go after them. So that starts next week once we get the deer harvest or doe harvest task done here in Wisconsin. So it's a constantly evolving thing, but the more we've put into it on the land management side, definitely has shown the results. And if I could stress that enough, I could say it 10 times and not stress it enough, is the more you put in, the more you're going to get out. But we're lucky enough that Casey and I carry a heavy passion for that side of land management, which is we both really enjoy it, and it's not work to us. So that's the best part. We really enjoy it, and we see the fruits of our labor come fall. So, and I think anybody who were to get into this and start putting the work into it, I would be surprised that they would not be very excited with the results that followed or the following fall, because it always seems to pay tenfold for us.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like, one thing you talked about there, Greg, is just being organized, and now that you're organized and kind of have a flow to this system, that system has opened up and you've learned what you just said, like where to put in what. And with that being said, it kind of moved your Wisconsin farm to like, hey, this is a prime opportunity to hunt this farm in the late season, which now allows you to kind of have that freedom to say, you know what, we can go down to the Missouri farm and we can go to Iowa or do whatever. Yep. But it's giving you that freedom in that schedule to lay out your season. But that's all based on, what you just talked about is putting in that work and then getting organized, seeing what's there and moving those right pieces around.
Yeah, and observation. I mean, when you sit in a set, sit with a purpose. Just don't go sit to hunt. I know we all want to hunt, and I get that because I love it more than the next guy. But we have learned over the years that when you sit with intent, and instead of having your nose in your phone all the time, watch the activity, and you will see the patterns. They will tell you what they want to do. They will tell you what you're doing, what you're not doing, and how to set up differently if you pay attention and give it the time. I mean, you've already set aside the morning or afternoon, whatever it may be, to go sit in a blind or in a tree stand, whatever ground blind it may be. Give yourself that opportunity to harvest that information. And if you become organized and you start writing it down and you go back to that set 2 or 3 times that year and you pull those notes up and you watch, you're going to start seeing some patterns. You're going to see what they're doing. And then you can say, okay, I don't like this. I need to do this, this, and this because I need to push that deer 50 yards or 75 yards coming out of that corner. I need to push him more towards my bow setup so that when he do come out, he's at 35 or 45 yards and give me a better chance instead of 75 or 90 yards. Well, what do you need to do to that? Well, lay down some trees, make it difficult for them to come out of that corner and force them down that 40 or 50 yards. And all of a sudden the deer are coming out in bow range. Everything we do is a direct result of what we observe, which then allows us to go in with a purpose, which will then set us up for success that following year. When these deer are coming out at 50, 60 yards and they're coming out within bow range, or we set up 2 different food transition, one of clover and Nebraska, and the Nebraska food line is at 40 yards. That's all by design, because you can try to change the deer movement as much as you can through different strategies. You're not going to control it, but they will do what you want them to do if you do certain things that I'm talking about. And that's laying things down, creating different paths, having transition zones of food sources, because deer do like to eat multiple sources. They don't like to sit there and gorge themselves. They're constantly grazing. We'll give them multiple sources in transition zones so they move through your plot and move through you and give you a chance to harvest them as they move from east to west or north to south. So there's, this is a whole nother podcast that I'm getting into, but it comes back to observing deer, making notes, and being organized, and then have the whereabouts to make those adjustments come, January through May, and put the work in. And I guarantee you'll have a smile on your face come fall.
Yeah, for sure. It's purpose-driven, right? And that's what it sounds like you do on all your farms, Greg. And, the results kind of speak for themselves. I don't think I know another guy, Greg, that has had, the last 4 or 5 years just, turn out to be so great for somebody. And, that's a compliment to you based on, me getting to know you now. It's all based on that work, right? Like, you've done a ton of work. This wasn't just by chance or luck. You didn't just, how do you get so lucky, Greg? It's based on what you're doing on those properties every day and changing and having those results come from a purpose.
That's right. And I think, I used to, in my earlier career of bow hunting, I used to sit and I would just to watch the animals but I didn't sit with intent. And I think when I changed my mindset, when I go in there, I'm very focused on what I'm seeing and what I'm not seeing. It's just as important if you're not seeing anything. Make notes of that, and make notes of what the weather was, what the pressure was, what the wind was, and what you see, and how many does there were, and did you see any bucks, and what were the ages? Were they 1 and 2 year olds, or were they 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 year olds? What were they? And where they came from, and when they exited. How long did they stick around the plot? That they could just pass through? They were gone in 45 seconds or less, or did they hang out for 15 or 25 minutes? And start making notes, and those deer will tell you what you need to do, but you need to sit with intent. And that's a big thing. And when my success rate went up is when I was sitting. When we hunt, we hunt with intent, and to harvest information and be organized and make those adjustments. And we started hunting less because we had the information, and so we know what they're doing. And when you hunt less, you have less pressure. Less pressure makes deer more comfortable, and they hang around longer in your plots. When they hang around longer, they're going to walk a lot more and in the open, and gives you more chances to see them in daylight, which in turn gives you more chances to harvest them. So there's a ton of advantages to everything we're talking about today. It's just that you've got to put the work in, and just like anything else in life, you put the work in, it always seems to give you rewards at the end.
Yeah, for sure. And, hopefully, Greg, if it's cool with you, we'll catch back up maybe in March and April and kind of recap, maybe some of these steps you've taken for management in the off season, on these farms, at that time frame again. I think it would be good to catch up to see what you're doing and where you're moving, and I should say, on some of these farms. And every year, like you kind of alluded to earlier, some things do slightly change, and you got to adapt to that. So I definitely would like to catch back up and talk some more land management with you.
Yeah, I would love to. Mother Nature is an amazing thing, and she's always making things more difficult on us all the time, because things, you might have a bunch of deadfall trees, a storm come through, you just never know what's going to change. And so, these next 4 or 5 months for us, it's actually my wife's favorite time of the year, because she is an absolute shed hunting junkie. So she said when the kids get into college, she'd like to go shed hunt for, every weekend for a month. She said even 6 weeks. She goes, she can't get enough of it. And it's funny how her process of shed hunting and my process of shedding is very similar, but very different. I mean, she's looking for sheds I'm looking for trails and patterns and exit and entries and plots and all those other things. Yes, I'm looking for sheds, but it's the best time of the year to see the chalkboard, I call it, where the deer are telling you where they're at, and it's easy to find because of the trails are so beaten down or the snow or whatever, and you can see it. So I shed a little slower than she does. She covers a lot more ground than I do, but that's another wonderful time to get out in the woods, and if you're going to walk your property, it's a perfect time and make notes what you're seeing, because that's a great tool for you to make adjustments off as well.
Yeah, this time of year is really, I want to say underrated, or maybe it's overlooked. I don't know which one you want to say.
Oh, yeah, but, both. I would agree with you, 100%. Both. Yeah.
It really is. And, it's just a time of year you need to get out, and if you want to call it shed hunting, I'm kind of like you, Craig. I'm a really bad shed hunter because I'm so busy looking at, there's a rub, or there's an old scrape, or, sometimes it's hard for me to focus on those sheds because I'm looking at every bit of browse or deer trail. And, God, I wish I was a better shed hunter. But anyways, it's your chance kind of to see all that information, and you're allowed to pressure some of those properties. So if you get the opportunity between now and, let's say, April 1st, get out there and do that before it starts to bloom again and gets green and thick. But it allows you to, kind of bump deer safely. And, man, you will learn what's underneath that canvas of a property, and it's so important.
Yeah, and it's always nice to do it with friends, family, whatever it may be. And if you do it with a group, and, I'm lucky enough to have Casey, and when we walk and we find a spot, I'll whistle, he'll whistle, and we'll go dissect a new spot together. If he sees a bunch of sign or a new rub line that we didn't see in the past, or a huge scrape that we didn't find, we'll drop a waypoint on it, because now we know that for whatever reason this is a new spot on the farm, and they're loving it, and you can tell by the rub line and how big they are, or the scrape, that this is a serious buck section of the farm. Well, drop a waypoint, don't forget about it, and go back and look at the aerial and go, okay, this pattern is new and different. How is this affecting us? How can we maximize this deer activity or deer traffic based on our access points? Or is it a rut funnel? Do we want to hunt this only 5 or 6, 10 days out of the year? Or can we develop a new food plot that we can put by this because it's new traffic they like, they're comfortable with it, and sit back and strategize? Or is it something you go, you know what? It's too deep. There's no way we can hunt this part of the farm. We just need to stay out, but we know it's here. It's good to know, and move on. Just because you find stuff doesn't mean you can hunt over it, but it does tell you what's going on. And every spot is not huntable. Sometimes you got to walk away and be a steward of the hunting, and just say, you know what, I would be my worst enemy by going in here. And sometimes that's hard to do, but it is the best thing to do. So I love having somebody else to pick a brain. I know hunting can be a solo sport, but I think if you find a buddy or a family member who has the same passion, you'll elevate your game by sharing ideas. And I think that's one thing that I could share. And that's one thing that we're doing today, Brandon, is, you and I had a wonderful conversation before the podcast even started. We should have recorded on that, because that was some great conversation we had.
I wish I would have, actually.
And sharing ideas with somebody with passion, we don't do enough of it. And we're only as good as our experiences, and our experiences mold what we do. And everybody has different experiences, but if we listen to everybody on their experiences, it'll shorten our learn curve much quicker and faster. So that's the beautiful thing that technology and podcasts allow us. It used to be seminars, and now we're moved into a, podcast, which is much more user-friendly and easier.
Yeah, for sure. You don't have to pack a lunch for a podcast, do you, Greg?
No, you don't. That's for sure.
For sure. But, Greg, thanks so much for being here today and telling us about this big deer and big deer stories. That's what we do here. And, just so everybody knows, Greg, let them know where they can find it on DeerCast. I know it just came up, and obviously your Instagram, because, I'll share the media art, but I just want to make sure everybody sees it because it's one heck of a buck, man. And congratulations, another just awesome archery deer, and just awesome to hear stories like this and be engaged and to learn. So thanks so much.
Oh, you bet. Well, I appreciate having me on. You can go see the hunt, as Brandon said, on the Drury Outdoors app called DeerCast. It just dropped yesterday. You can follow me. I'm not very active on Facebook. Very active on Instagram, which is Greg, Greg _ Glesinger, GLESINGER _ Drury Outdoors. So follow me there. If you have any questions that once you listen to this podcast and you want to shoot me a DM, please be patient. Typically when these podcasts drop, my DMs go up. So I'll do my best to get to all of them, and I'll be happy to share what I know. I'll show you what I know. That doesn't mean it's the only way. As Brandon said earlier, just because it works for me doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. So, but I will be more than happy to help anybody with my experiences to hopefully elevate their game. So I appreciate the time, Brandon. It's always a pleasure getting with you, and I hope everybody wonderful success moving into 2021. This passion we call hunting is one of the most important things that I have in my life, and it's really enjoyable. And I wish we could expose more people to it, because it's getting under pressure more than ever now that we have a new administrative staff. Our Second Amendment is under more pressure than it ever has been. So we definitely need to unite as a group and fight what we believe for, because it's definitely getting attacked in a different level. So hopefully we can unite and stay together and help each other.
Absolutely. And I do really think that, podcasts like this gives us an opportunity to touch somebody that, is not exposed or maybe barely got into hunting, and now we can kind of push them over that edge. So again, Greg, thanks for that, because, without really good guests like this to help share and pass along this knowledge, it's hard to do by yourself. So I appreciate the conversation.
Anytime, buddy. I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And boys and girls, as you know, you can find us every week, iTunes, Unfiltered Outdoor app, now on Amazon Music, Spotify. Check us out. Leave us a 5-star review, and we'll see you guys again next week. Thanks again, Greg.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, and one bit of information, there is a price change coming to the HuntStand app, so make sure if you guys get the opportunity, use the code TAKEAIM10 to lock in the lower rate now. There's some new features that are coming to absolutely justify the price increase, but it's just a few dollars. But you might as well save some loot, use the code TAKEAIM10 and get in there and get that discount before the price change takes effect. So make sure to check that out. HuntStand app, download it today.